Thanks for joining us here today. Very honored to be joined by some of our frontline law enforcement officers here, conservation officers, who are going to be part, and have been already, part of the expanded effort to have a presence along our southern border. Everybody in Manitoba right now is paying attention to building up the relationship with the United States of America. We know that President Trump has brought in a bunch of new dynamics for our province and for our great country of Canada. And one of the important priorities that we have as the government of Manitoba is to send a strong message to people in our province that having a strong and secure border is important to us as Manitobans. Now, this is something that's a big priority for people here in the province because we want to have safe communities. But I also know that people in southern Manitoba have seen very, very serious situations that underline the fact that there's a humanitarian priority along the border as well. We know that just within the past few years, there was a very tragic story where a family from India lost their lives, freezing to death, trying to cross the border heading south. Just within the past few weeks, people coming north from the U.S. into Canada, the reports being that they didn't have the gloves, mitts, and toques to be warm. And yes, we are Canadians, so I will say toques. Now, as part of our overall response to invest in jobs and to protect the Manitoba economy, we're also sending this message that asking our conservation officers to have that presence, to be that additional eyes and ears along the border, to be able to respond to that humanitarian priority, potentially save lives there. And if they do see anything of note, to feed that into the other law enforcement partners that we have at the federal level who help to secure Canada's border, such as CBSA and, of course, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Now, here today we're with conservation officers out of Sprague and Manitou. And I'd also add that we're making this investment alongside additional resources for motor carrier enforcement officials who will be along roads and highways near the American border as well. And of course, we are investing additional resources into the Manitoba contingent of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. So as Canadians and as Manitobans, we want to have a strong and secure border. And during these unprecedented times, it's important that we as a province put our resources forward to ensure that we're keeping you safe and we're keeping our economy strong. At the same time, throughout our history as Manitobans, we have welcomed people here from around the world fleeing conflict, fleeing famine, fleeing natural disaster. And when those situations arise and that humanitarian call is made, Manitobans have always stood up to answer. And so we're asking our conservation officers here to play a part in continuing those long-standing Manitoba values of being those friendly Manitobans who will extend that helping hand to people in need. So this is one of the things that our government is doing to keep you safe. And I want to thank Corey Meadows, our Chief Conservation Officer, who is here with us today, as well as the officers here from Sprague and Manitou, as well as those who are part of this initiative in other locations like Virden, Boissevain, Steinbach, and Winnipeg. So happy to take questions from folks in attendance, and then we'll go to Zoom afterwards. What we're asking is for our conservation officers to stand up a presence along the southern border. So the existing resources that we have, we've been staffing up conservation officers since our government was elected. There's a lot more to do on that front. We'd like to hire more conservation officers. But again, seeing people deployed along the southern border to be that additional set of eyes and ears. If there are people who are in those vulnerable circumstances, as we've heard about recently, we'd like folks to be able to help out. But at the same time, we've got to be respectful of other folks' jurisdiction and the existing lines of authority when we're talking about the RCMP, when we're talking about the Canadian Border Services Agency. So if there's a situation where it's potentially criminal activity that the RCMP or CBSA should be responding to, then what we're asking our officers here to do is to just feed that information in, to be that eyes and ears to help and be part of a coordinated response to secure the border.
Can you expand a bit on that humanitarian effort?
Well, our conservation officers do really important work each and every day of the year. And whether it's during hunting season or with fishing, you know, I think the officers would tell you that when they see somebody who needs a hand, they're willing to step in and help out, whether that's with a flat or just, you know, maybe helping somebody call for assistance. Now that we're asking people in the CO line of work, as well as our motor carrier enforcement officers to help out with securing the border, we know that there are crossings happening. Just recently we saw people crossing from the U.S. into Canada who were not prepared for a Manitoba winter. And so part of the humanitarian response is if you see somebody, and we know that it can be life and death in a Manitoba winter, we'd be asking for you to help out. As part of this specific initiative, you're talking about 11. Ouais. Ah oui, certainement. Alors, la sécurisation de la frontière est un enjeu très important pour notre gouvernement. C'est un enjeu pour avancer la sécurité des communautés manitobaines, mais en même temps pour appuyer l'économie. Alors, il y a des ressources et des investissements que nous annonçons aujourd'hui pour ajouter les appuis pour la sécurisation des frontières.
Quel est le rôle des agents des agents de conservation? What are the role of the conservation officers?
Bien, la première chose est d'avoir une présence sur la frontière. Et puis, deuxièmement, pour nous aider de regarder de ce qui arrive. Oui, ça se peut qu'on verra des personnes qui viennent des États-Unis dans des situations vulnérables. Si ça c'est la réalité, si ça c'est la situation, nous les aiderons. Et en même temps, s'il y a des éléments de la crime qu'on voit sur la frontière, bien on va engager avec la gendarmerie royale et puis aussi avec les autres forces, soit canadiens ou américains.
For years now that the number of conservation officers in the province are understaffed.
Yeah.
Is it appropriate to add more work to their plate when we don't have enough conservation officers as it is?
Well, it's brutal what the PC government did to COs in this province. I used to hear it all the time that we're losing people to Saskatchewan and other places because of the pay. So as a government, we gave a better contract, and since we came into office, we've been hiring up. So the vacancy rate under our watch went from 20% to 10%. Now that tells you there's still more work to do. Absolutely, we would like to hire more conservation officers. But at a time like this, where Manitobans are looking for reassurance and are looking for people to protect our province, we're saying that our government is going to protect your jobs and our economy, and we're going to be asking law enforcement officers, including conservation officers and motor carrier enforcement officials, to help with securing the border. Well, it's definitely part of a comprehensive strategy to respond to what President Trump is bringing forward. But let's be clear, when we're talking about securing the border and when we're talking about cracking down on drug trafficking, what's the downside? These are things that Manitobans want to see happen. Manitobans have been calling for years to have action on cracking down on drug trafficking in our communities, and so that's why under the leadership of the Minister of Justice, we've been doing exactly that. New tools to give law enforcement the ability to crack down on people bringing toxic drugs into our communities, an end to funding freezes for law enforcement that existed under the previous government, hiring of more officers. And then when it comes to the border, yeah, we're talking about the border in relation to the trade relationship and the strong friendship we have with the United States of America, but it's also a priority for the average person. Like if we're to go to, you know, Gretna or Altona or Emerson or any community in the area, people will tell you that they want to have a secure border. But they'll also tell you that they have a humanitarian heart for some of those very, very difficult situations that we heard of, whether recently, people traveling north, or in the past few years, people traveling south.
So this question might be better for the conservation officials, but do you anticipate, you talked about, you know, the jurisdictions with the CBSA, but,
Yeah.
you know, talking about drug trafficking, if the COs see something that looks suspicious, they intervene, we can just call RCMP. Like, I'm just trying to understand how they would help with potential illegal activity.
Yeah, I think when you're talking about things like drug trafficking, there I'm talking about the additional resources we put into the RCMP. And as part of this border security initiative, we've invested about another $460,000 in RCMP overtime, primarily. But when we're talking about the presence of the conservation officers, these are folks who are going to be active in parts of our province or along the southern border already. And so we're asking for them to be deployed into areas to help us just be that additional set of eyes and ears. And it might be that in some parts of the southern border, there may not be a ton of activity, but then on other parts of the southern border here, there is going to be evidence of people crossing that border. And so again, just to be that eyes and ears in the first instance, if people do need that humanitarian assistance, you know, to help out, while still, of course, keeping themselves safe first and foremost. And then again, to liaise with those other agencies who have the primary responsibility to secure the border. So we know first and foremost the border is the federal government's responsibility, and that's why they have the CBSA and they have the RCMP. But we as a province have a responsibility to stand up for your jobs and to make sure that our communities are safe. And that's why with the tools that we have at the provincial level, including conservation officers, motor carrier enforcement, that we are putting these additional investments forward to help advance the priorities of you in our own communities, but also to send a message to our American allies that we're serious about safety and security.
Premier Kinew, 8 years ago in Virden, the municipality had to receive a lot of people coming from the United States. How did the government support those small communities to help people like that arrive in the city? Is there like an emergency plan or something?
En anglais ou en français?
We'll start in English.
Start in English? Okay. Yeah, we're developing contingency plans, of course. Our hope is that we can keep things at, you know, the official level in a very strong and positive relationship with the U.S. But of course, everybody hears what President Trump is saying. And so we have a responsibility to prepare contingency plans. But at this stage, the first and foremost effort, let's keep things on a positive footing. Let's try and keep the trade flowing. Let's try to keep people's jobs and our economy revving along in a good way.
Thank you.
Has the COs and the motor vehicle enforcement teams, have they already started this work?
Yes, yes, as of a few weeks ago. Yeah.
Will COs intervene physically in case they see, you know, an irregular crossing happening at the
Well, I think it'll depend on the situation. So similar to the question that Jeff was asking, right? Like if it's a situation that is more appropriate for the RCMP to be responding, like it has something to do with, you know, I guess suspicion of drug trafficking or something like that, then I think that's more to do with those other law enforcement agencies. But if you see somebody trying to cross an open plain like this without gloves and hats on, then I would say then that would be a situation where there'd be that direct intervention.
Have they already been trained? Have there been instances where this work has already been displayed or occurred?
Well, they've been active for a few weeks now, and I think we're hearing some reports of evidence of border crossing taking place, but I don't know that there's specific incidents to point to. Yeah.
So humanitarian,
I can get to the cost in a second.
sorry, in a
Yeah.
humanitarian situation, let's say they see people crossing without gloves, suits, whatever, they'll pick them up and keep them warm and call RCMP in that situation? Or I'm just wondering, like, what the steps would be?
Yeah, I think it's not going to be up to conservation officers to provide shelter to people long term. I'm just saying if somebody's in a desperate way in a Manitoba winter, we'd want them to help. Yeah. Breakdown of costs? Yeah, okay, so I mentioned the $460K for RCMP. You got about $360K for the COs, $400K for capital. That has to do with some of the snow machines and gators and stuff like that you'll be seeing. And then $200K for the motor carrier officers, and that's current year.
So in that cost for the COs, like these are already staff that are already existing. What would that cost be for the office?
This is the budget to cover those expenses operating.
So that was an existing expense, right? There's
Yeah,
no
and I'm
salary.
telling you the cost of it. Yeah. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Okay, we'll go to Zoom.
Thank you, Premier. We've got 3 reporters on Zoom today. We'll start with Mitchell Ringos from City TV. Mitchell, go ahead.
Hi, thanks, Premier, for taking the time. I'm just wondering, obviously it's announcements about getting more boots on the ground, but we also saw your government try and get more eyes in the sky. with the Black Hawk helicopter being pushed on the border to help patrols. I'm just wondering how that initiative has been going and if you've been seeing benefits.
Yeah, so the Black Hawk helicopter is an RCMP tool that's part of the federal government's $1.3 billion investment in securing the border. Certainly we welcome that. Part of the announcement today also includes a helicopter resource for these officers to be able to use to put eyes along the border. And the hope is for us is that with this increased presence, we'll be able to have Manitoba ready for whatever comes next. We saw in the first Trump administration that there were people coming north across our border from the U.S. and Manitoba had to respond. So what we're saying today is we're sending a strong message to our American allies that we're serious about border security, but first and foremost, we're sending that message to Manitobans that our province is ready for whatever happens next.
And just as a follow-up question from one of my colleagues, I'm just wondering if the province has been asked to house any asylum seekers coming to Canada in provincial jails by Ottawa, and just if you have any response to that.
We received the correspondence from the federal government that's been reported on, and I don't know that we have much to share beyond that. It's a federal initiative.
Okay, thank you. Steve, you're next up.
Hi, thanks. Premier, I'm just trying to get a handle on what the additional resources are here. It sounds like, given previous announcements, these are existing conservation officers. While doing their conservation officer duty, they're being asked to keep an eye out on the border. Is that correct? Or are people being redeployed, taken away from conservation officer duties specifically to perform border patrol?
Well, I think what you're seeing here is that conservation officers who are doing the conservation work that they signed up to do, and they do a great job of supporting our communities with each and every day, we're now asking them to do more. And we're asking them to expand our presence along the southern border. And so that means being deployed into regions where there are border crossings, irregular crossings potentially, but also to be that additional set of eyes and ears and to liaise with our partners with the RCMP and of course CBSA to ensure that Manitoba is doing its part to secure our southern border, but also to prepare a humanitarian response should we see more people crossing from the United States of America into Canada.
So are they being redeployed from other detachments? Are they being redeployed within their existing base area? Where, if anywhere, are they being taken from in order to be put closer to the border?
Well, these conservation officers are being taken from Virden.
And last up, we have Timur from Globe and Mail. Go ahead, Timur.
Thank you, Premier, for taking our questions. I wanted this question might be for you or Mr. Meadows here. I have to sort of ask some specific numbers here, if you could give us about these officers in the field. Are you hiring more conservation officers than the ones that currently exist? And are they, because these are questions everybody is asking, but we want to know some numbers if possible about what the training level is for these exact officers, or more being trained for this. If any numbers, please. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Happy to repeat those numbers. Again, when we're talking about conservation officer staffing in Manitoba, when we took office, there was a 20% vacancy rate. Not good. So we've been staffing up during our time in office. We brought that number down to 10% vacancy. Again, still not good enough, more work to be done. And we are asking these officers to do more. I'll be very clear about that. And that's why the note of appreciation and gratitude and thanks is there. These are law enforcement officials. Again, where safety on a given day has to be top of mind for all of us as Manitobans thinking about the work that they do. But during this current moment where we're asking all Manitobans to think about our economy and to protecting our jobs here at home, one of the things that we're doing is providing these additional resources and investments into COs so that they can help us expand our presence along our southern border. So there's a lot of things that we're doing to ensure that the resources are there to support. I ran through some of the numbers in terms of capital and operating costs. Of course, on the economic side, today we're also standing up the tariff hotline. So if you're a business, if you're a worker, somebody who's wondering about what the potential impacts of tariffs could be, you can visit manitoba.ca/tariff response. And you can also call either 204-945-3744 or 1-866-626-4862. That's a general inquiry phone line to access the tariff response. And we'll be there to ensure that we have quick answers to the questions that you have about what we're looking at. And of course, if there's a specific industry or you're in ag, manufacturing, transportation or whatever, and you got some very detailed questions you'd like to get answered, we'll make sure that we turn those around within a day.
Any follow-up, Teamer?
Yeah, Premier, by numbers, I did mean numbers of the exact officers. We've been thrown these numbers around of 130 officers in the field. We've heard those kinds of things. I'm just wondering in terms of the human, level of how many physical humans conservation officers are on the field. But I'm going to reserve that question since that's not being answered. I have a question though that I think it's a question more about at this point, Premier, about why this is happening at this point to begin with. I do think it's important we ask this question today. President-elect Donald Trump, when he's the president, Donald Trump, since this election, his threat with the tariffs and this crackdown at the border, it seems that these are things stemming from that. Were these things you were planning to do, the strengthening of the U.S. border, that side, our side of it, was this something you were planning to do anyway, or was this something that Mr. Trump had to have done, that tariff threat, and then that's why we're at this point where these are things that are happening?
President Trump has changed the world, and we all have to respond. And this is one of the ways that we're responding. We've always had a strong and secure border, and now we're showing it in a much more visible fashion. But the way we will respond to a President Trump is always in keeping with Manitoba values. And while our values as Manitobans are to ensure that we have a strong and secure border, our values as Manitoba people also say that we have to have a humanitarian heart. And the reality along this part of the border is that we've seen, I guess, more of the issues of people threatening life and limb to cross in a cold Manitoba winter. And while there might be a lot of talk on other borders about other priorities for here, the realistic thing that we have to prepare for is to deal with people who are not prepared for a Manitoba blizzard or a Manitoba winter. And so yes, we are responding to a new administration in the U.S., but we're responding in a way that's consistent with who we've always been as Manitobans. And that's to be a friendly people who have a big heart and are willing to help people in need. Before we conclude, I also want to acknowledge that today is International Holocaust Remembrance Day. And it is incumbent on all of us to keep the living memory of the Holocaust alive in our time. What took place during the Holocaust is one of the worst crimes against humanity that any of us have ever known. And when we see that there's a generation of young people today who needs to learn about the Holocaust, we are there to ensure that they'll have the resources and the ability so that we can live up to that important saying, never again. And for our government, we always condemn hatred. When it's hatred of people based on who they are, where they come from, their religion, we always condemn that. And of course, today on International Holocaust Remembrance Day, we condemn anti-Semitism, and we call on all Manitobans to keep that living memory of the Holocaust alive so that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past.
Premier, regarding the commercial vehicle safety, is there any
Yeah.
consideration around increasing their capacity or their resources? I know they're helping out with this as well.
Yeah.
But any thought to expand what they do?
Yeah, that's part of what we're doing. I wonder if there's a specific angle you're thinking about, because we're providing additional dollars into the motor carrier enforcement. We've expanded their presence along the southern border, so whether that's highways or roads that are leading south into the U.S., their presence for the past few weeks already has been increased in those areas. And again, they're there conducting their regular duties of enforcing laws and regulation when it comes to motor carriers and vehicles, but they're also there with an eye towards ensuring that the security of the border is maintained.
And I guess with the conservation officers, again, now that this is an added responsibility for them to do, they will have less time to do their existing resources. I know they're not abandoning that, but is there an area of GO
No, I don't think so. I think we're asking them to do more for the time being. It's my estimation that we are going to be responding to the need to have our relationship with the United States evolve, not over the short term, but over the next few years. I think this is going to be an ongoing situation. But it's my hope that when we're talking about the COs in particular, that we're going to be able to do the staffing. Staff up the CO complement here in Manitoba, so that this is maybe just more of an interim step where we're asking them to do more, and then we'd be able to bring more people onto the front lines to make that a more sustainable situation in the long term. All right, thanks everybody. Yeah, I'll see you, toi.